is evidence-based fraud examinations, because in the end, we got to gather up the evidence if we're going to prove anything, especially in court. So I'm going to turn off my camera. Here we go. Pow. All right. So let's get started on this chapter, shall we? Okay. Again, our fraud triangle. If you are called to court to testify, as it's happened for me, you need to stick to the facts when you testify, okay, which are provided by the triangle of fraud action, that other triangle. If you're called as an expert witness, you will be asked about that. But if you're being called as the fraud examiner on a particular case, stick to the facts. Again, we go to the important questions of who, what, where, who, what, when, where, and how, but not why, because why, you're going to be speculating about the person's motives, okay? And again, ensure that your work is grounded in the evidence. Avoid commenting on motives associated with the perpetrator's pressure or rationalization. Again, we're going to keep an eye out for those things, but we're not going, we just give out the facts of the situation. You might think that, well, the guy, the accused just went through a messy divorce and lost his house, his car, his dog, whatever. You can state those as facts, but then don't get into the why or, the idea that would be motive, okay, or pressure. Or he just lost a promotion. That might be a rationalization, but don't state it that way. You can state what you found in the records. Say you went through the employment records and found he had, was up for a promotion and didn't get it, something like that. On the other hand, if you're called as an expert witness, then you would be giving an opinion, but your opinion, okay, your testimony has to be grounded in evidence, objective, reliable, relevant, and valid evidence, okay? Not just, well, I have a gut feeling. No, you have to be able to articulate where your opinion is coming from. All right. So in the modules for this chapter, we have module 1, where we're going to introduce the essence of forensic accounting and fraud examination. Module 2 will review the framework for evidence. Module 3, we're going to take a closer examination of evidence that often contributes to all elements of the triangle of fraud action. And remember that we have the fraud triangle, pressure, rationalization, and opportunity. But the triangle of fraud action is the act, concealment, and conversion. Module 4, we'll talk about the types of evidence associated with concealment. Okay, that's second leg of the fraud triangle of fraud action. And then module 4, we'll look at an overview of the tools and techniques we have for developing evidence of conversion, that third leg of the triangle of fraud action. And again, the benefits derived from the act. So let's move on. Module 1, okay, fraud examination, who, what, where, when, how, and why, evidence-based examinations. To complete an exam, the fraud examiner or forensic accountant needs to answer the essential questions: who, what, where, when, how, and why, but with evidence. Okay, if you've ever taken a journalism course, this is what they teach you, right? In addition, the answers need to be woven into a coherent story. A storyline grounded in the evidence is much more convincing to prosecutors, attorneys, judges, and juries. Okay, and notice the first, when you have to convince other prosecutors. Let's say you work at a company, or been either work at the company or been retained by a company where they've had a fraud situation, and the bosses at the company want to prosecute the alleged offender. Well, the first thing you have to do is, and I've been there, I've done this, or seen it, is convince either the state's attorney or the U.S. attorney to prosecute the case, that you have the evidence to go forward. One of the reasons there's been such a growth, if you will, in the fraud examination industry is that many jurisdictions, if they have a fraud case, just don't have the law enforcement manpower to dedicate to an examination unless it's big enough. Okay. So you might have a fraud case in the company you work for, or who has retained you. Maybe it's for, $500,000 that's been absconded. Well, the police and the prosecutors might say, well, is it covered by insurance? Yeah. Well, that's a lot of money, and might break your company. And even if it's not covered by insurance, it's, your insurance, or even if it's covered, your premiums are going to go up in the future. And they might say, yeah, we really don't want to pursue that. It's not big enough. We've got what they'll call real crimes, murder, mayhem, etc. As they say in news sometimes, if it bleeds, it leads. And they might not, and if you haven't developed the case yourself to the point where they could just, pick it up and run with it, they may not take it. So anymore, the reality of the situation is very often you have to put together a case file that you can deliver to law enforcement / prosecutors, with a nice big red bow on it. And it's got everything they need. You've got witness statements, you've got physical evidence, you've got accounting records, et cetera, et cetera. So they just need to pick it up and go with it without much additional work involved. So that's the first person you have to, people you have to convince. And then maybe attorneys at your firm. But then when you get to court, you have to convince the judge and the jury. Okay. So moving forward, the hypothesis evidence matrix. Incomplete evidence is a fact of life and an ongoing challenge to examiners. And if you've ever played the game Clue, or more to the point, if you ever watched, maybe you have, a television program where they call it, police procedural. The best is the original Law and Order, where, at the beginning of the episode, you see that a crime has taken place. They find a body on the street or whatever. And then the detectives have to try to piece together from the physical evidence, the who, what, where, when, why, and how, and all that good stuff. And during the course of the, 50 minutes, or if you take out the commercials, 48 minutes, they're able to, they begin with a preliminary hypothesis and they collect evidence, and then undoubtedly it goes, no, not that one. Let's try something else. And so as they collect evidence, they shift the hypothesis as to how they think the crime occurred. Okay. So TV shows can be very helpful in that regard. So professionals in this field, they address potential evidentiary shortcomings or holes in the storyline through the consideration of alternative hypotheses. So you have alternative fraud theories. And this approach is referred to as the analysis of competing hypotheses. And the specific tool is the hypothesis evidence matrix. Professionals in this field need to understand that no one is better at generating alternative theories of the case than the opposing attorneys. So if this, in a fraud case, it's the defense attorney. So you think you've got everything that points that this person committed the fraud. for this reason, and this is how they did it. Well, in defending the client, the opposing attorney will come up with another theory. It wasn't him, it was this other guy that did it. And you're, barking up the wrong tree. You're going after the wrong person. So, as we'll see in a moment, in fact, I know there's software out there for creating these hypothesis matrices. And here's some of the the terms, or what abbreviations that we use. So in this case, we have 5 different hypotheses. The first is that the books are not materially misstated. Nope, everything's fine. There were these were actual customer invoices, and there was no fictitious revenues. Hypothesis 2 is, yeah, there were fictitious revenues and fake customer invoices. Okay, hypothesis 3, there was channel stuffing going on. Okay, they were pushing products out there to try, especially at the end of the fiscal year, to try and record higher sales than are appropriate. Hypothesis 4, there was a bad accounts receivable clerk who had poor collection skills. Hypothesis 5, you have a customer complaint / pay problem. All right. And then the other symbols we use is 0 is evidence has no diagnostic value. Plus sign, it's consistent with the hypothesis. And minus sign, it disqualifies the hypothesis altogether. So here we've got our matrix, and we see along the top, we first have the heading of evidence, and then the 5 hypotheses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you could have a lot more than 5, okay? And then you have a column for the source of the evidence, and then the reliability of the evidence, and the validity of the evidence, okay? So the reliability, we've used letters A, B, C, and D, and the validity is 1 or 2. And so we look at the a review of the financial statements, okay? And well, earnings per share is steady despite mergers and acquisitions and other business activities, okay? So that is consistent for all 4 hypotheses. The source is the audited financial statements, which has a reliability of A and a validity of 1. Sales increasing, marketing, advertising, flat to decreasing, okay? And that's consistent. Okay, and then we got, let's take a look at the organizational chart. Who has the opportunity to do it? Well, we got the internal audit reports to the CEO. Okay, it's kind of meaningless, not good, but okay. Again, reliability and validity, A1. You have family members, related parties in leadership positions, not good, but a 0. We look at our ratio analyses, and we have accounts receivable growth significantly greater than the sales percentage growth. Okay, it doesn't do much for hypothesis 1, but consistent for the other ones. You have a cash drain, operating cash flows. Okay, it's flat despite revenue and income growth. And we keep going down this chart with the different pieces of evidence and determining which hypotheses the evidence supports or doesn't support. So going back to the term predication, again, it's not prediction, even though some of these PowerPoint slides misspell it. Predication, again, predicate, that which goes before, right? Like predicate, subject. It's defined as the totality of circumstances that would lead a reasonable, professionally trained, and prudent individual to believe that a fraud has occurred, is occurring, or is about to occur. That's essentially the same definition as probable cause. But we didn't want, the Joe Wells and the other folks who started fraud examination as a profession, as a discipline, didn't want to get wrapped up in all of the legal cases about what is probable cause and what is not probable cause. So instead, in fraud examination, we use the word predication. It's very, very much the same. Again, you need predication prior to conducting investigation. If you don't, as I've mentioned before, you could get yourself in trouble by getting sued by the person you're investigating. Okay, especially if you say anything about the person. Okay, that could be confused as slander or libel, defamation of character. So again, it's the starting point for any formal fraud investigation. Suspicion without corroborating evidence is not sufficient. Okay, so there's some money missing. Well, that guy over there, he looks funny. Well, that is not an articulable piece of evidence. Okay, you can articulate it, but it really doesn't mean anything. Okay, it's just suspicion. A few red flags, especially if there's just one red flag, unless it's really major, typically is not sufficient. Try to get a couple. And again, red flag does not mean that a fraud has occurred. It means that maybe you should dig a little more. Okay. So let's talk about our good old fraud triangle. Okay. The three sides: opportunity, perceived pressure, and rationalization. The profile of the typical fraudster is basically the average citizen. So what causes good people to turn bad? And again, we look at those three, I like to think of it as three-legged stool. And so in order for the fraud stool to remain, to be steady, you need all three legs. This is the characteristics needed to enable a fraud: opportunity, perceived pressure, and rationalization. So what kind of evidence do we look for when trying to find evidence to prove the fraud triangle? Evidence of those financial pressures, evidence of vices or similar problems. Are they addicted to drugs, to gambling, any number of different vices out there that can drain your wallet quickly. We know that studies show that as gambling gets more available, the incidence of fraud pick up. And now we've got all the sports gambling going on. So it's, and maybe some of you have been doing it with the NCAA pools, right? So we look for evidence of vices, evidence of organizational pressure to achieve financial goals, evidence of the challenge of getting away with the fraud, or if you will, the lack of a challenge of getting away. That's easy to get away with. Evidence of that excessive ego, that wheeler-dealer personality we talk about. And then the pressure, family pressure, peer pressure. Okay. So, since pressure is fundamentally a factor unique to the individual, okay, it's not objective, it's subjective. Two people might have the exact same, financial pressures or peer pressure. Some perceive it as major pressure, and others are like, okay. But these sort of pressures are unique to each person. So the only evidence we can really gather is indirect evidence. Even that evidence is generally circumstantial, but circumstantial evidence is, still permissible. in a court of law if you bring it in right. Since most fraudsters have no criminal histories and do not think of themselves as criminal, fraud perpetrators typically have to develop some rationalization for their actions. Again, rationalization is a manufactured, somewhat arbitrary justification for otherwise unethical or illegal behavior. So they're justifying that which they've done or plan on doing. Now, the authors talk about another theory that's been developed called MICE, M-I-C-E. And it goes to the motivation of a fraudster. And the MICE stands for money, ideology, coercion, and ego/entitlement. So the E can be either of those two words. They didn't want to call it MICE. Okay. So, but the two biggest ones, the two most commonly observed, are money and ego. Why did they perpetrate the fraud? They wanted money. Why did they perpetrate the fraud? Because of their big ego. Okay, they were going to show the bosses, what they could do and get away with, and I'm going to show that I'm smarter than them. Okay. Ideology is often observed characteristics associated with taxpayer evasion schemes. Okay, my friends in the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, CID. There are, and maybe you know folks in this, hopefully you're not involved in this, different political movements where those who are involved with it feel that they do not have to pay taxes, that it is illegal and unconstitutional and all these other things. When I worked as a law clerk in federal court in Chicago, every few months, the U.S. attorney would be prosecuting someone who would contend that the income tax laws were illegal, or they don't apply to them. They're a sovereign citizen. These folks also print up their own license plates, so they don't have to buy license plates from the state. So these folks, they are essentially perpetrating frauds using an ideology as their motivation. Again, the problem with intent. When we look at the elements of fraud, an investigator has to provide evidence of intent. So maybe it's a big financial statement fraud. Okay, what could the defense say? The defense could say, yeah, well, the people, the controller did come up with financial statements that were wrong, but he is, and I've heard this one, he's dyslexic. He didn't, doesn't really understand the numbers, didn't read them right. Doesn't really understand accounting, was just going along with it. Okay, so what you have to do as the fraud examiner is provide evidence of intent. But again, intent is hard to prove as it is subjective. Okay, but you can, persuade a jury, a finder of fact, a judge, if it's a non-bench trial, by showing certain evidence. Okay, so the intent is the difference between mistake and fraud. So the elements of fraud, we've mentioned this other triangle, is the act, concealment, because again, fraud is a crime of surreptitious, that is hidden, and conversion. And concealment is one of the best ways of persuading a jury or a judge of intent to defraud. Because if it was just a mistake, okay, so correct your mistake. If it's fraud, you're trying to cover it up. An important element of intent can be inferred from repetitive similar acts as well. There's debate in the profession about whether tracing money to a perpetrator's bank account is sufficient evidence of conversion. You know, you stole this excess money and we found it deposited into your checking account. Well, yeah, well, I'm not just going to leave it out on the counter. I will, once I get the books figured out, I was going to return it. That's the defense. Now, if they put it in their checking account and then spent it on a vacation to Disney World, then you've got conversion. But just putting into a bank account, there's debate as to whether that is really evidence of conversion, or was that just, frugal safekeeping of the money. To be successful, the investigator must be able to explain the outcome of the investigation. Although fraud examination and forensic accounting use evidence-based decision-making. One moment. Had to hit the sneeze button on my microphone. They use evidence-based decision-making. Critical thinking skills and careful analysis are essential to understand what the numbers really mean. All right. Now let's talk more about this evidence. Without evidence, there's no proof. And neither criminal conviction nor civil verdicts are possible without proof, and thus without evidence. Well, I would say that, criminal convictions are not possible. A verdict is possible, but it's a verdict, for the defendant. All right. Anything that is legally admitted to trial that is relevant to the case is evidence. Okay, that kind of begs its own question, but it's, what is evidence? It's anything that's legally admitted at trial and relevant to the case. The federal courts follow the federal rules of evidence. Abbreviated sometimes as Federal Rules of Evidence, codified FRIC, F-R-E-C. And then most states, including Illinois, have a state rules of evidence, the Illinois rules of evidence, which are essentially the federal rules. Okay, the federal rules are generally very good, and most states have pretty much adopted the rules. Some states may have, a small deviation in it for whatever reason, but generally they're very much look the same. We talk about three different types of evidence. Testimonial evidence. Okay, you get somebody on the witness stand and they testify, or you place someone under oath and maybe they're not able to come into the court. Place them under oath and get an affidavit from them. It's testimonial, even if it's in written form. Real evidence is the thing, okay? The stuff. It could be the accounting record. It could be the battery that blew up, okay? In a personal injury case. Demonstrative evidence is, just as I said, it's evidence where you demonstrate how something happened in the courtroom or how it was done, all right? And then we have direct evidence, which goes right to the heart of the matter. The thing, speaks for itself, as we say, res ipsa loquitur in Latin. The thing speaks for itself. Or circumstantial, where it doesn't exactly do it, but it is, as we would say, probative. It goes to the truth of the matter that you are asserting. Okay. In order to be admitted in court, evidence must be relevant, material, and competent. Okay. So it has to, relevant. It has that, you might have evidence of a fraud at a company, and you are, want to bring into evidence a list of the eye color and hair color of all of the employees. Okay. Probably not relevant. maybe there's some relevance, and depending on the facts of the case, but probably not relevant. Okay, it has to be material. It has to, you know, be worth something. All right, and must be competent. It has to be, dependable in a sense. So, additionally, to be admitted at trial, evidence must be authenticated. Somebody has to say, we have, the canceled check that was used in this conversion transaction. Oh, that's great. Where'd you get it? Oh, I don't know. No, that's not good enough. Okay, you have to be able to authenticate it. You bring in the person in the corporate file room who's the custodian of records, and you want to bring in some paid invoices and some purchase orders. Well, you need to bring in the person to say, yes, this purchase order was filed in the file room, and I'll testify to that. All right. Can't just bring it in without being able to authenticate the document. It could otherwise be forged, right? Made up out of whole cloth, as they say. And again, the evidence must have integrity, must be unaltered from its original condition. You have to show the chain of custody. That you got the invoice from the custodian of records for the company. You placed it in the evidence bag. I tell you, the Ziploc bag is a wonderful thing. You put it in there. If you got a seal to put on it, so much the better. You wrote on the front of it in a Sharpie what it is, and then you took it and you placed it in your evidence locker or a safe, and you keep a log as to who has handled this. Every time it comes out of the safe, somebody has to sign off that they had it, and then they sign off when they put it back. Okay, you have to maintain that chain of custody. Again, you have to be properly stored, secured with unauthorized access prevented, especially in the case of electronic files. You should also have backup copies, and if it's electronic evidence, electronic and hard copies should be maintained in separate locations. And then it has to be inventoried so they can be located when necessary. Okay, in big litigation cases that have been worked on, every document will essentially have its own either barcode or QR code. Just print up stickers in advance, and you put the sticker on it, and you zap it, and then you put into a computer record what the document is, where you got it, what it depicts, and then you place it in a file, and usually you scan it as well, so you can at least pull up that electronic image of the document when necessary. As to the fraudster, one moment. Okay, white-collar crime occurs during both good and bad economic times. In good economic times, the fraudsters, it's easier to pull off a fraud because the company still keeps making money. They just may not be making as much money as they otherwise would. Thus, it's easier to conceal the fraud. But in bad economic times, still perpetrating the fraud, but the crimes can become unsustainable. Bad economy brings white-collar crimes to the surface. Okay, it's like if you remember the stories in the news over the past several years when there have been droughts out in the West, and some rivers and lakes have been drying up. And as they dry up, why look, there's a boat that, or in many cases, there's some cars that are emerging as the water level goes down. Same with frauds during bad economic times. Those frauds that were easy to conceal during the good economic times suddenly get exposed. Evaluating the quality of evidence, again, we use the three terms: Relevance, reliability, and validity. Relevance means the information will make a difference to the decision maker. Okay, you're trying to prove a fraud. It's only relevant if it helps prove the fraud, and especially will the decision maker, whether it be a judge or a jury, will this help them make that decision? Reliability goes to the source providing the information. Okay, so you've got a confidential source. He's come up with, he's willing to testify as to this, that, and the other thing, but then you find out that in his past he has been convicted of perjury. Well, that's probably not a very reliable source. And validity refers to the underlying accuracy and integrity of the information. So maybe that, testimony, maybe that source is not that reliable, but maybe you're able to, validate, able to show that the information that this person gives is in fact valid and does in fact have integrity. So we rate reliability, and we saw this on a scale from A through D, A, B, C, D. A is the source's reliability is unquestioned. Okay, good source, cool. B, usually reliable. The majority of past information is proven to be reliable. C, unreliable. Okay, the reliability is a little spotty, a little sporadic. D, unknown. Okay. We don't have an F because F would mean they're completely unreliable. Okay, they're a known liar and they're always lying. Well, in that case, you don't even consider the evidence. Okay. We talk about validity, and there we rate it 1 to 4. If the information can be corroborated by others, it's confirmed. Rating of 1. If it's probable, because it's consistent with past accounts, that's a 2. Doubtful, information is inconsistent with past accounts, that's a 3, and simply can't be evaluated. It's like it's kind of out there. There's nothing to compare it to hold up against. That's 4. Can't be judged. Now, very important, and you do a fraud case, that you get this evidence and you have it documented and you organize it well, because you could, I was working on cases where we literally had to rent out a warehouse to store all the documents. Okay. And one case it was going to be such a large case with so much evidence and so many different parties involved. The case took place in California, that rather than try to fit all the documents and such into the courthouse and the courtroom in the county where it's being tried, instead the courts found a school that had just closed due to declining population, and the court rented the school. Now the parties each had to kick in for it, but they converted the gymnasium into the courtroom, and then the different parties shared classrooms for their offices. And then some of the classrooms are used for storing all of the documents involved. And that also was one of the first cases that extensively used scanned documents. All the documents were scanned. Again, the evidence was organized well. It was everything was scanned. Every piece was assigned a unique number and a unique barcode. And so that in the courtroom, that gymnasium, it's now a courtroom, what they did was put a monitor on the judge's bench, also monitors on each of the counsel tables, and several monitors in the jury box. So rather than passing around a sheet of paper, they could call up a piece of evidence and just display it on the, and put it on the displays. And the parties all agreed to that. So it's, but it wouldn't have been able to be done if they hadn't organized the evidence first, document, scan it, and provide those unique document numbers for each of them as well. So, and again, here's a case with million plus documents, but because everything had a unique number, you were able to search for the document and then find it, and then just very quickly call it up. So gathering, documenting, organizing, retaining, and retrieving data, information, and evidence are an important part of the examination process. The professionals should always begin with the assumption that his or her work, report, and conclusion, as well as all other aspects of his or her examination, will be presented and scrutinized in a court of law. What does that mean? Hey, every report you prepare, every note you prepare, your notes as the fraud examiner could be subpoenaed by the defense, and suddenly your notes that had these snide little remarks written in it, and not just your notes, but your emails, your text messages, those could all go into evidence. So be careful what you record, what you write down, what you email, what you text. Okay. So realize it could be brought into evidence. I mean, the defense might decide that maybe their client is pretty guilty, but what we're going to do is we're going to show that the fraud examiner was prejudiced. And so they bring into court, they bring you into court, and they bring in some emails you wrote with these snide remarks to show that you were out to get the defendant. It has nothing to do with the evidence. When you're up against the wall, you do whatever you can. So careful attention to work paper detail and the gathering, documenting, organizing, and retention of work product is critical, because you can't show that chain of custody, that a very important piece of evidence in your case might not be admitted because you failed in recording when that piece of that document went into your files, who was looking at it, when they took it out, when they returned it, etc. Okay. So here are the first 9 of, I think it's 14 requirements for gathering and organizing evidence. Plan for the collection of the records. Okay, I had one case where we got a subpoena and got the court to sign off on it, where we essentially, gathered up, rooms of file cabinets with documents, and we photocopied them all and scanned them all. And actually, we scanned them. We didn't photocopy them because we had to return the documents to them. So we had to make a plan. We had to rent out that, as I say, we rented out some warehouse space for it. Had to, get the appropriate equipment to do high-speed scanning. We got the equipment to what's called, they still call it a Bates stamp. Bates, it's like a rubber stamp where every time you press down on it, it changes a number. So you press down once, it's number 1. The second time, it's number 2. Okay, so we still call it Bates stamping in parlance. But you put that unique number. So you have to prepare all of this in advance. Then you go and you get the records. Okay, you get the judge to sign off on the subpoena. And again, depending on the situation, it might be hostile. Okay, if it's a criminal prosecution, excuse me, you may need to go in with, as we'll see in these cases, for example, if you have a hospital that's suspected of Medicare fraud, the feds will show up with a team from the IRS Criminal Investigations Division, a team from the Health and Human Services investigators, and these are armed people, and they'll show up with their U-Haul trucks, and this just come in and say, we're taking all your files, and they take them. Okay, and they're gone. Okay, so obtain an inventory, and then you bring it in. If it's a civil case, you bring the documents in and you inventory them. Develop templates for financial records, databases, and analysis. Enter data from the records into the templates. Double and triple check records that are entered manually, because I'll tell you, you do it wrong, the defense is going to lambaste you. Okay, how can we trust any of this evidence? They got these numbers wrong, right? Review the records for examination leads. Sort and analyze the records. Review the records for patterns. Review the records for unusual activity. Analyze cash transaction flows across multiple accounts. Identify additional leads to investigate. Graphically explore the data by using flowcharts, diagram, link charts, timeline, and so on. And again, there's just some incredible apps out there where you get all this information into your database, and then you can let these apps go, and they can come up with timelines and flowcharts and all this good stuff, link charts. Prepare a summary of financial activity, and then from all of that, after all of your analysis, develop conclusions from the records, graphics, and summaries. Okay, that's once you've done all that, and you're going to bring this case to court, or it might be before an arbitrator, it might be before an administrative court judge or an agency. Prepare really nice charts, okay? Because you don't know what the particular background of the person is, and if you're, as somebody said, if you're arguing to a jury, you're arguing to 12 people who aren't smart enough to figure out how to get out of jury duty. That's a terrible thing to say, but they're lay people, so this stuff might be second nature to you, but you have to prepare graphics that anyone can understand. Okay. Other considerations for evidence. Organizing all documents for easy retrieval. That's key, because I've been in courtrooms where somebody says, well, we've got a piece of evidence, we've got a document that will prove this, that, or the other thing, and they are searching for it through their briefcases, through their files they have, and then they're looking and looking and looking, and that's a good way to irritate the judge and irritate a jury. So don't do that. Be able to retrieve them. And also at depositions, you need to pull up documents right away. All right. Identifying additional data that will need to be gathered either by the examiner or via subpoena or search warrant. Maintain the chain of custody, including keeping the records in a locked office or storage facility. And again, nobody goes into that facility without signing in date and time. If they remove or really touch anything in there, that's recorded as well. And then when they leave, date and time, and if they're hopefully not taking anything out. Have a photocopier. So if somebody wants a document, you can give them a copy. They don't take the evidence or the document out of your, locked office, locked storage area, etc. Okay. Evidence sources for the act, concealment, and conversion. Okay. So we have documents. Okay. We'll talk more about documents in general. Bank, credit card, and investment statements. One of my favorite terms you learn in fraud examination, invigilation. Interviewing and interrogations. Surveillance and covert operations. Confidential sources and informants. CTRs, SARs, and FinCEN 8300Ss. Okay, those are documents that financial institutions have to file with the federal government. My favorite is SARs. Okay, suspicious activity reports. Somebody came into the bank, every day for 3 weeks and deposited, $999, thinking that, maybe $1,000 might trigger somebody looking for it. So I'll keep it, that's, are they doing anything wrong that you know of? No. Is it suspicious? Yeah. Well, you have to file a report saying, yeah, I think it's kind of sus, as they say. Of course, emails have become a wonderful thing. It's amazing what people think. Emails do not ever go away. There's ways of finding them. You think you may have deleted it? It's still hidden in the computer, and we've got good forensic people who can dig it out. Data mining, pattern recognition, and other digital tools. They're just wonderful. And then other physical evidence out there. So, documents. Documentary evidence is the backbone of most financial forensic investigations. I mean, every now and then you get one which testimonial, lays it all out. There's a conspiracy going on with 3 people, and one person comes forward and just spills the beans and gives you everything you need. Well, you want to back it up with documents. But generally, documentary evidence is the backbone. And sometimes more reliable than eyewitnesses. Remember, as I say, documents don't change their story. Okay? Eyewitnesses can maybe not see things the way they really are. Okay? Now, and you can, get that eyewitness to, break down on the witness stand and admit that they didn't really see that. I know that personally, as I was in the past an eyewitness called during a murder trial. And the defense counsel tried to get me to admit that I didn't see what I actually saw. And he was unsuccessful. And the guy got 99 years without probation. So that's good. For me, hopefully they don't let him out. I've lived an interesting life, folks. Also, potential for fingerprints. One of the reasons when we, depending on the case, as I say, that the Ziploc bag is a wonderful thing. And so are cotton gloves that don't leave fingerprints, so that when you pick up a document, your fingerprints aren't going on it. But if there are any latent fingerprints on that document, it's going to be protected inside that Ziploc bag. Again, documents can provide evidence related to all 3 of those elements: the act, the concealment, and the conversion. So here's a nice list of things that you should look at. Signatures, handwriting, alterations, erasures, eradications, creation date, counterfeits, indented writings, paper examination, ink examination, okay? Even typeface. There was a case some years back where it came down to, supposedly it was an old document. It was brought into evidence, and it was shown that it couldn't be legitimate because the typeface used in the document was not available for 5 more years. So interesting. One moment, I'm going to hit the sneeze button here. But that time it was the cough. Okay. Source of paper, folds, tears, cuts. Okay. That's one of the reasons I've seen cases where you're looking at these, matching up these staple holes on a document. So it was a will. It was a case involving a will. And somebody took the will apart, added an additional page to it, and stapled it back together. Well, what happened was they took it apart, in court, and showed that every page of that will had 2 sets of staple marks, except for the one page that was improperly inserted that only had 1 set of staple marks. So a lot of things, okay, folds, tears, cuts. restoration of damaged, photocopy or original, facsimiles, no, faxes, notaries, seals, stamps, cachets, envelope adhesives, typewriter source and marks, sequence of creation, a number sequence. And by the way, some photocopy machines, especially color photocopiers, older ones, will put a unique number on the copies, usually in a light yellow ink. So, sometimes that can come into play as well. Okay, what about all these financial statements, bank statements, credit card statements, investment statements? They may provide clues and other investigative leads. Checking account activity may show deposits from sources other than known places of employment. It's like, hey, you pull up the person's personal checking account. Where'd all that money come from? That they were living off of. It wasn't their paycheck. Bank account disbursements may be made to previously unknown credit cards, installment accounts, and investment accounts. Opening a new can of soda pop here. Credit card statements may demonstrate the amounts spent far exceed the suspect's known sources of income. All great clues you can get from these statements. Those three words are so key in fraud investigation. Follow the money. Where did it go? Also important in that area of fraud, known as corruption. Again, having worked in federal court for 3 years and seeing a lot of political corruption cases, very often they were the key piece of evidence was following the money. Transactions should be scrutinized, provide evidence of the act and conversion, and provide clues as to lifestyle as well. Okay, so where do you get that? Well, bank statements, deposit tickets, canceled checks, account applications, signatures, credit card applications, mortgage application, loan applications. And remember, especially for those last two, and I think the third one as well, but when you're filling out a mortgage application or loan application for a bank, be very careful. It is a violation of federal law to lie on such documents. Okay, so don't try to overstate your income. Better be prepared to show that it's truthful, or you can be brought up on federal fraud charges. Okay, here's that term, invigilation. A technique that considers periods before, during, and after a suspected fraud has occurred. You look for changes in patterns of performance around the time of suspicious activity, can provide evidence of the act, helps calculate how much money may be missing. For example, a classic case of invigilation would deal with, say, you have a money counting room, and you suspect that somebody in the money counting room has been walking away with some of the money. Okay, well, I know what we're going to do. So you've been keeping records of how much, what the sales should have generated in cash and how much cash is actually being reported. And so now you get this deficits, that you suspect somebody's taking the money. So you go and you install a closed circuit camera right there in the money counting room that everyone can see. It's right there looking at everyone. And you tell them, we suspect there might have been some absconding of money here. So we're going to put in this, we rented this closed circuit camera. We're going to stick it in here to keep an eye on you folks. And you put it in there for a month or two. And then you analyze the numbers. And all of a sudden, you don't have missing money anymore. All the cash coming in is being recorded. And so then you go back and you say, that didn't prove anything. And this, we were renting this camera equipment. It costs a lot of money, so we're taking it out. And you take it out. And guess what? Now the money is missing again. Okay, so you perform some treatment to the system, and you look at the patterns before the treatment, during the treatment, and after the treatment. And if suddenly there's a change in the pattern, you can the invigilation is what caused that change, and then you know, aha, someone in the money counting room is in fact absconding with funds. Okay, so here's an example of invigilation. It's sort of like you see, there's a funny meme. You see signs at manufacturing plants and construction sites that have 0 days or last accident 120 days ago, or no accidents in 120 days. And there's one that's like 0 accidents since we fired Jim, something like that. So here you got Jim. And so we look at the amount of money, okay, each month in 20X1 and 20X2. So we'll call it 2021, 2022. That was before they hired Jim. And then you had 4 years where Jim was working there. And then we have 1 year, 2027 in the future, when Jim wasn't working there anymore. Okay. And, well, gee, look at the figures. We're in the 4,000, 5,000s, most of them in a couple of months there in 20X1 and 2. And when Jim comes in there, the numbers start dropping. So we look at those actual numbers. We have 53,000, 49,000, 51, 47, 39, 29, and then you fired Jim, and suddenly it's bounced straight up to 51. So now there's a invigilation of a sort where you've got this treatment, Jim. Okay, we expected, say, around 51.4 each year. And so we had these shortages. So then from this, we can estimate a loss. So invigilation, look at the prior, the before, the during, and the after. Interviewing and interrogation. We'll talk more about that later. In civil cases, in criminal cases, we talk about interrogations, police interrogations. We don't like using that term in fraud examination and in civil cases. It carries a lot of baggage, if you will. So we call them interviews, okay? In a civil case, interviews are most often carried out in the form of a deposition. Deposition, the person is called in. Now, if they're a party to a lawsuit, one side or the other will just notice up a deposition, say, okay, you're a party to the lawsuit. We want you to come into the lawyer's office. There'll be a court reporter there. Sometimes they'll videotape it as well. They're a notary public, so they can place you under oath. You raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And then you're giving sworn testimony. You're answering questions from the opposing attorney. Then your attorney can then ask questions as well. Okay. And it's all under oath. It's all being recorded and transcribed. Cool. Now, if it is someone who's not party to the case, then you have to go out and get a subpoena. And the courts issue those generally without a problem. Now, if there's a problem, the person, when they get the subpoena, they can go to court or have their attorney go to court and quash the subpoena, okay, and say that I have nothing to add to this case. Or, for example, let's say you subpoena the person's attorney. Well, they would go to the court and say, look, anything I know about this case is covered under attorney-client privilege, and I can't testify to it. But in any event, whether it be a party to the case, in which case you don't need a subpoena, or a non-party where you get a subpoena, you bring the person in. Generally, it takes place in a attorney's office, in a conference room, and the opposing, one attorney will be asking questions, and you can bring in your own attorney to, ask questions to help you as well. Or it could be if you're just sort of a third-party eyewitness. Couple of, could have both sides involved on it. It's used to find information and discover evidence. Used to gather evidence pertinent to the act, concealment, and conversion. It can also be used to get the person to sort of get the person's testimony set in concrete, if you will, so that if if months or years later even you call them as a witness at trial and they say something different, then you pull out the transcript of that deposition and say, well, isn't it true that when you were deposed and you were under oath, you said X, Y, and Z, and today you're saying A, B, and C. So if nothing else, you can, make the person's credibility or bring it into question. Okay. So, so a deposition, sworn statements under oath, recorded, and transcripts are then issued. Good stuff. Surveillance and covert operations, and please do not do this without consulting first with legal counsel, because each state has different laws with regards to what you're allowed to do. You do it wrong, you could be facing, again, a invasion of privacy lawsuit. Okay, you don't want to do that. So get legal counsel to make sure you're okay. So surveillance, generally, if you can surveil and record things out in public. Okay, friends of mine are fraud examiners who work for insurance companies, say looking for workers' compensation fraud. I may have mentioned this before. Somebody claims that they've been injured on the job and they're cannot work at all, and so you send out your investigator, and here they sit outside their house, and here comes the guy out of his house, and he's I know one case he drove to a work site. He's carrying big things of asphalt shingles up a ladder to put a new roof on a building. Kind of contradicts his statement that he is unable to work. He in fact is working. But he's also collecting unemployment compensation. So since that was all done out in public, you can surveil and you can videotape, and we now have such wonderful things. In the olden days, you had to have big cameras with lenses and movie cameras and then video cameras. Now you just use an iPhone. Okay. So covert operations, especially, be careful. Bring in your legal counsel to see what you can do. You identify, gathering evidence, identify those engaged in illegal activities, or at least activities contrary to what they have said previously. You can be used to identify co-conspirators, recover money, determine how an operation is conducted. Can be conducted either by private investigators or law enforcement. Interesting legal matter here. Law enforcement, certainly. Private investigator, state of Illinois, in order to conduct a private investigation, you need to have a licensed private investigator or a certified public accountant. The laws in Illinois, and I believe in every state, say that CPAs can conduct private investigations. One of these days, I'm going to go into the business of, printing little metal badges for CPAs to use if they ever go out on a forensic accounting thing, and they can, flash, CPA, right? Flash your badge. But again, talk to legal counsel. A fixed point is, the camera is set up in one place. A mobile surveillance is you're following somebody in your car. Videography, because the equipment is so cheap nowadays, I say on an iPhone, getting the use of that. In fact, one of the things too is because that's so prevalent and because of the TV police dramas and such, juries expect it. If you bring in your private investigator and put him on the witness stand and they testify that, yes, I saw him, as I say, carrying sacks of concrete up a ladder, and the jury is going to say, well, where's the video of that? Oh, well, I don't have a video. Well, they're going to doubt your story. They want to see, so people want to see the pictures. And then undercover operations where you go in under a false identity and you try to find out what's going on, again, those, be very careful with those. Okay. CIs, confidential informants, confidential sources and informants. They should have no criminal involvement in the case, but sometimes they do. Informants typically have direct or indirect role in the criminal activity. That's a problem. Okay, so there's a difference between a source and an informant. Source, no involvement. Informant, had some maybe peripheral, still involved. They're usually confidential. Consider what their motives are for coming forward. Maybe it's true that they just want to, clear their conscience. Doubtful, but it can happen. But because of that, especially for informants, check the reliability, check the validity of the information. And there we talked about the CTRs, the SARs, and the FinCENs 8300. CTRs are currency transaction reports, SAR, suspicious activity reports, and FinCEN 8300s, excellent source of information for law enforcement. CTRs must be filed when you have a transaction that includes 10,000 or more in a single day. Okay. And this doesn't mean, just financial institution. If you have a car dealer and somebody comes in to buy a car and, opens up the briefcase and there's 10,000 or, 20,000, 50,000 in cash, you got to file a report. SARs are used to report suspicious activity to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and that's our friends at FinCEN, okay, who do a lot of good work here. Again, SARs, the CTR requires that $10,000, amount, in a single day. It can be multiple transactions, but as long as, if somebody comes in at 9 a.m. with 8,000 and comes in at 1 p.m. with 4,000, that gets a CTR. Now, if it's below 10,000, but it's really creepy, as I say, they're bringing in, especially if it's just below $1,000 several times a day. That seems a little, and it's just below $10,000 each day. Doesn't require a CTR, but it is suspicious. Report it. And then, the Form 8300, again, that's for any business that receives more than 10,000 in cash. I got a little confused there. Okay. Again, a car dealership, a jeweler. Okay. Somebody is buying something for 10 grand, especially like a jeweler or a coin dealer. Somebody walks in and has, 20,000 in cash and buys some gold coins and Krugerrands. Gee, what could he be up to or she be up to? Well, it could be money laundering. Because that can be very easily hidden in a suitcase and taken out of the country, right? Okay. What about email, text messages, and social media? Okay. Smoking gun evidence of financial crimes, fraud, motivation for activities, and other information can be found in all of those things. Okay. Email within an organization is not private. So if you're emailing out from your work address, hey, that's not yours. That's not private. Provides linkages among peoples and transactions, so you can make those link charts, figure out who's involved in this scheme. Sophisticated criminals will use anonymous remailers, bounce these emails all around the globe, good luck trying to figure out where it came from. The social media, though, it's amazing how many folks, to try and look fancy on social media, go on and show off the jewelry and the other things through their ill-gotten gains, show off the weaponry that they own. Okay, not wise. Okay, not wise. And there's our big data. And again, data analytics is becoming so huge in so many things. But one of the areas is in forensic accounting and fraud examination. So you got these, this big, you got a corporation that's got, generating all sorts of data that's being recorded. What can you do with it? Well, you can run some of our good data analytic apps through it, can gather up that information, can analyze it, print out a report or issue a report, in a few minutes, what would have taken you days or weeks in the past. Again, remember, there's a lot of, not just within a company, but also outside, lots of personal information captured in databases around the world. The amount of information captured electronically has ballooned to staggering levels. Data mining software can look for hidden patterns, can help predict future behavior. The results of pattern recognition searches and data analytics provide evidence of who, what, where, when, how, and why. It's especially good in tracking money laundering and cash flows going around the world. Other types of physical evidence: fingerprints on documents. I have my own fingerprint kit. In fact, they used to sell them in the bookstore at Governor State. I don't know if they still do. I, in fact, used it once. Jason Knowles, Channel 7 News, when iPhones first started using fingerprints, to open up your phone. I showed how you can use a fingerprint kit, and he had a phone, he had to use his fingerprint to open it up, and I was able to capture his fingerprint off the face of the phone, convert it into something that I can then use to open up the phone. I won't go into all the details, but he was duly impressed. Okay, so your fingerprints on documents, good evidence. Phony documents, okay. Forged signatures. Again, typewriters, if people still use typewriters, the keys, sometimes have unique identifying information where the R doesn't come all the way down, the capital R, or what have you. So you can trace a typewritten note or letter or document back to a particular typewriter. As I say, photocopiers sometimes do also leave some evidence. Addresses and phone numbers can provide proof of linkages. Again, get some of that good link apps that just tumble all the data in there, and it can show where who has been involved in this, linking up all of those phone numbers and such. Dates and time provide evidence about the who, what, where, why, how. Again, we have got timeline software. You can use that. Just dump all that data in there, and it creates the timeline. And medical condition can provide insight into financial pressures on the perpetrator. So medical records can come into play as well. Evidence sources specific to concealment. Okay. Again, when we're trying to prove motive, one of the best ways of proving it is showing that, you can say that, oh, I accidentally, wrote down the wrong number. But if you then tried concealing it, yeah, that shows it wasn't a mistake, it was fraud. So did they alter documents? So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about general ledger and journal entries and reconciling items. And then, again, it's coming up on us, tax returns. Altered documents. Fraud examiners and forensic accountants provide the first line of defense in efforts to identify possible alterations. Altered accounting books provide evidence of concealment. Qualified professionals should examine documents in question. So you as a fraud examiner, again, you're the first line. You go, hi, this looks funny. But there are folks out there who are forensic document examiners who will look at a document, look at specimens, and look at more reliable ones, and determine whether or not the document you're looking at was in fact altered. Just like there are certified signature and handwriting experts as well. Okay, how do you alter documents? Well, again, forged signatures, forged handwriting, restored erasures. Okay, something got erased and then it got put back in. Erasures themselves. Eradications, where this kind of crossed out completely. Recently created documents, supposedly created years ago. Again, look at the type of paper involved. I did a seminar at the FBI on art fraud. And it's amazing how much fraudulent art is out there, okay? And one of the paints that was used in the past had as its base, trying to remember, I think it was donkey urine. And it was a particular, believe it or not, particular type of yellow paint that some of the old masters used. Well, the modern forgers tried recreating their works, but you can't get that paint anymore. And so you do a chemical analysis of a little tiny chip of paint to determine whether it's the type of paint that was used in the 1600s or what have you. Let's see, counterfeiting of documents using copy machines, counterfeiting documents with typewriters, counterfeiting documents with our color printers and matched paper. Again, lots of different ways we can counterfeit documents. What about looking at the accounting records themselves? Again, in a good accounting system, disbursements that pass through the general ledger create a money trail. First of all, it should be going through the cash disbursements journal, right? Not through the general, what they'll get through. Okay. Debits to revenues should be carefully scrutinized. Yeah, revenue accounts should mostly, if not completely, be credits, not debits. Ensure that debits to liability general ledger accounts are legitimate. Again, liabilities accounts should have credits. Debits are, do occur. There shouldn't be too many of them, though. Debits to assets and expense accounts are the most used method of concealment. Journal entries need to be scrutinized as a source, backup, and approval. So entries to the general journal, bypassing, a sales journal, bypassing a cash disbursements journal, cash receipts journal. Those are suspicious, okay? Or not suspicious, but those should be scrutinized. What about the tax returns? Okay, the tax returns, again, tax accounting and financial accounting, managerial accounting, different thing altogether. But the numbers should be correlated with activity in bank accounts and corporate books. A corporation should be filing a Schedule M that requires reconciliation between the book income numbers and the taxable income numbers. It can provide evidence of involvement in businesses that aren't disclosed otherwise by the target. So get a hold of that Schedule M. Amounts and types of deductions might raise questions regarding the business operation themselves. So what are some of those deductions they're taking? Do they look unusual? Okay, now let's talk. We talked about concealment. Let's talk about conversion evidence sources specific to conversion. Okay, and then using that for locating those hidden assets and those unknown sources of income. A couple of different methods for hiding assets. Unknown hidden bank accounts, unknown hidden investment accounts, purchasing assets through straw men or front organizations, transfer of assets or ownership to another party. Okay, so you kind of bought a house and transferred it to somebody else. Okay. So look for that transfer activity in the tax records and in the financial records. Income may be diverted away from known accounts to those unknown accounts, especially keep an eye out for offshore accounts, right? Other places where assets can be directed include children's trusts, mortgage payments, insurance policies, prepaid credit cards, that's becoming a big one, savings bonds, traveler's checks. You don't see too many traveler's checks these days, and money orders. Okay. Some of the ways, especially if you've got a kickback scheme going, rather than paying the person cash, instead the company pays down their mortgage, pays off their credit card. Okay, or they give them a company credit card and they pay that. Insurance policies can be used to accumulate wealth that does not show up on most financial statements. And here's everyone's favorite, the concealed offshore financial accounts, transactions, loans, and my favorite, not my favorite, but divorce. Again, I've known a couple of good forensic accountants. The vast majority of their work is in the area of divorce litigation. So, concealed offshore financial accounts, transactions, and loans, they're used by sophisticated individuals with significant hoards of ill-gotten gain. They're chosen for favorable tax treatment and a commitment to secrecy, especially that second one. Some folks would be willing to pay taxes on the money. They just don't want it. They don't want their name used. The different places where you can put funds keeps changing because international pressure comes down on them. It used to be, Switzerland. You could get a numbered Swiss bank account. You still can, but the Swiss banks would not disclose who the owner of the account was. Pressure on them, and they got their government to change the law there. Then the Bahamas for a while, the Seychelles Islands for a while. I think there's still a little bit in it. The island of Malta in the Caribbean is becoming popular for this. So the commitment to secrecy is the real appeal. Divorce. Yeah, a bitter divorce. A spouse may want to hide assets. So, there was the spouse that, especially the spouse that, was making the most money, whether it's a man or a woman, and they don't want to have to, under the particular laws of most states, have to give 50% of the marital property. That's all the property that got accumulated during the course of the marriage. They don't want to give it to that divorcing spouse, especially if they found out that they were cheating or what have you. So they try hiding it. So as I say, my friends who are forensic accountants do a lot of work in that for that very reason. So he or she disperses a large amount of money to the consultant at an offshore address. Okay, hiding assets, common ploy in marital disputes. Best not to get divorced. That would be good. So, indirect methods of income reconstruction. Okay, the very famous tax evasion case in Chicago, going back some decades, involved Al Capone. Right here you had Al Capone, who was making for that, millions, which at that time was a lot of money. Okay. And I believe he reported in the year in question on his federal income tax return that he made it's either $30,000 or $40,000 as a used furniture salesperson or used furniture sales. And it was really one of the first major cases where the Treasury Department utilized forensic accounting. And so they created a financial profile of Scarface and showed that he made a lot more money than he reported on his 1040, and therefore was and knew about it, therefore was guilty of tax evasion, and they sent him off to Alcatraz. He was released some years later and then lived a quiet life in Florida until he passed away. And I happen to know Al Capone's granddaughter, who knew her grandfather for a few years before he passed away. And she has a book came out a few years ago about it. Any event, but Al Capone was one of the first cases of the use of forensic accounting. So it's used for developing indicators of concealed income and hidden assets. A large amount of legwork is required in developing sources of information. So we have a couple of indirect methods. So you can, have the direct method. So if you could show that Al got paid X amount of money for, illegal beer and alcohol sales. Remember this during the Prohibition. That'd be great. But otherwise, you can use the indirect method. Okay, and we will show you these methods now. The net worth method. It should be worth, not work. The net worth method, the lifestyle probe, and the bank records method. And what they used on Al, I believe, was the net worth method. And they showed that, the old accounting equation, assets equals liabilities and owner's equity. Fine. And the amount paid for an asset minus obligations equals the owner's portion or their net worth. Okay, so essentially for a person, their equity, their net worth is their assets minus their liabilities. Okay, so examine changes in net worth from year to year. Well, most folks, if their net worth has gone up, it's because they earned some money. Okay, they made income. And then you provide evidence that the amounts paid for assets and expenditures, okay, exceeded known income. So if their net worth went way up each year, as they showed with Al Capone, and yet he's reporting that he made $30,000 in used furniture sales, and yet his net worth went up $2.5 million, something like that. There's a lot of income that that's not been reported, that's been hidden. Okay. So steps for computing net worth. Calculate the net worth for a base year and then each subsequent year. Determine the known income for each year after the base year. And that, again, for tax evasion purposes, what did they report as their income? Calculate the change in net worth. Subtract the income from those known sources, and the remainder is income from unknown and possibly illegal sources. Example, okay, for an individual, example of assets, cash in all accounts, personal property, real property, and securities. For an organization, cash, stocks, bonds, securities, accounts, notes receivable, inventory, prepaid expenses, real estate, equipment, and vehicles. Cool. And you all know this stuff. They're the liabilities for an individual. They're the liabilities there for an organization. And here is your financial profile worksheet for a net worth analysis. Okay, so we have the base year of 2017, and we show the assets for this person. Okay, and we add them all up, and they come to $387,000 in assets. Their liabilities for 2017 add them up $210,500, giving a net worth in the base year of $176,500. Okay. In 2018, their net worth came to be $273,300. Okay, that's a change of $96,800 in their net worth. Not bad. Okay, they had identified expenses of $40,000. Estimated total income should then be $136,800. Okay, if they made that much, they had $40,000 expenses. The remainder was that increase in their net worth. But they reported to the IRS, or their income from known sources was $62,500, meaning we've got another $74,300 that's not been identified. 2019, their net worth at the end of the year is $415,300, meaning they had a positive change of $142,000. According to their testimony during their divorce, they had $50,000 in identified expenses. So their total estimated income for that year should have been $192,000. Again, during their testimony in the court for their divorce case, they said that their income, and also reported on their tax return, was $65,625. So apparently somewhere they made an additional $126,375. Now, there could be an explanation for that. Maybe, a relative died and left that to them. Okay, it's really not an income. It would be a gift. That's fine. Nonetheless, in a divorce, the divorcing spouse might be entitled to some of that. All right. Now, a lifestyle probe, little different, looks at the sources and application of funds, addresses the flow of funds for a given period. If known expenditures are greater than known income, there must be unknown income. Has advantages over the net worth method. It's because it's easier to use and understand, can be calculated for periods shorter than a year, can be used to run a quick and dirty analysis, can be used to confront targets with other analytical results. Okay. Look at obvious lifestyle changes: lavish residence, expensive cars and boats, vacation homes, private schools for children, exotic vacations. I would recommend to everyone here, when you can, watch the movie all the Queen's Horses. All the Queen's Horses, produced by my friend and colleague at DePaul University, Kelly Pope, and deals with the municipal fraud that happened out in Dixon, Illinois, by Rita Crundwell, who embezzled millions of dollars from the city of Dixon, Illinois. Was living a lavish lifestyle. Had all the Queen's Horses because she had all of these show horses, and had ridiculous living spaces. Had would go to these horse shows in a mobile home that I think was worth over $1 million. I mean, it's, again, see the movie, but it is a good example of the lifestyle profile type of examination. Steps to calculate unknown income: gather information on amounts spent for a base year and each subsequent year. Determine known income for each year. Calculate the amount of all known expenditures. Subtract the estimate of all known income. And there, the difference is that income from unknown sources. I mean, she was supposedly making, a couple of, tens of thousands. I forget what her salary was. Rita Crundwell is as treasurer and controller of the city of Dixon, which right there should be a problem, right? No separation of duties. The person in charge of the assets was also the one doing the accounting for it. Not good. and yet she was living this, incredible lifestyle. Financial profile worksheet for sources and application funds. You see it there. There's the application funds for these 2 years. Home mortgage payments. Where did you get that information? From CTRs and SARs. Saving account deposits. You can subpoena the bank, get the bank records. And we see those in there. Stocks, you get from the brokerage. Watch, got from the ex-husband. A cabin, okay, from the county records. Remodeled the cabin from building permits. Florida home, we got from the county records. Again, some of these county records, especially for real estate, they are available free online. The different vehicles, that's 2 Beamers. Okay, well, 1 Beamer and the loan payments on it. They got a sailboat and some other expenses according to the ex-husband. So there you've got, so this person's spending in 1 year $243,530, the next year $389,760. According to their tax returns, they made $65,000 1 year and $125,000 the next. And a gift from parent, $12,000. A down payment of the BMW, $25,000. Loan from the ex-husband, $25,000. So hey, there's still a missing $141,530 and $239,760. So where did all that come from? Maybe it's just all put on credit cards. Probably not. The bank records method is a hybrid method, assumes that when cash is received, it's deposited in a bank or spent. So identify deposits to all known accounts. Add in known cash expenditures not paid by bank account, check, ATM, or electronic funds transfer. The sum, add up or sum the total spent from all sources, subtract the income from known sources, and then again, the difference will be the funds from unknown sources. Here's an example of that. And we've got the months for the years 2018 and 2019. That's from our, from our banks, bank statements. Then we have, let's see, savings and loan deposit, an IRA account deposit. Okay, so we've got all that money, okay, for each of the 2 years. Then we look at their cash expenditures, okay, that we have records of. Total cash spent, known sources of income. Okay, we have known sources of cash because it's a loan, and consulting income. And now we've got an $88,000, $124,000 in unidentified sources. Okay. And if you're talking quick and dirty, there's nothing like the old T account, right? The purpose of the cash T account is to determine if the money spent by an individual is more than what is reasonable based on their tax return. Sometimes referred to as available cash. Used to determine if the money spent by an individual is more than what's reasonable based on their tax returns. Here's a quick and dirty cash T account method. Okay, so there's your wages from Form 1040, line 7, your income. And then from your W-2s, you got the FIT, the FICA, the Medicare, state withholding, and they had a refund as well. Add all those things up, they should have had $2,997,000. Okay. So what are some of the defenses and rebuttals for this unknown source of income? I actually prefer calling it unknown source of funds, because it may not necessarily fall into the definition of income, but nonetheless, investigators should have an evidence trail that suggests possible defenses are simply not feasible. Again, going back to Dixon, Illinois, and Rita Crundwell, when people questioned her, like, wow, how can you afford all these horses? Oh, I inherited a lot of money. So if you're the fraud investigator, find out if that's true. Look into her family background, which actually she grew up in Dixon, Illinois. People knew her family. They knew there were no wealthy folks in that family. So the fact that she got away with this as long as she can is almost incredible. So possible defenses are the estimated cash from unknown sources was accumulated in prior periods. It was, again, obtained by gift or inheritance. There were loan proceeds. Okay, so keep an eye out for loans. Or you won the lottery or gambling winnings. That came up some months ago with Governor Pritzker, who apparently likes to go out to Vegas and play poker. And in his tax return, he reported that he made a good deal of money in poker winnings. But that would would be an unknown source of cash, and if he could show it, and incredibly, let's see, in 2024, Pritzker reported net gambling winnings of $1.4 million. So he's pretty much good at that, mostly from blackjack during a vacation. So it's if you like them or you don't like them, there you go. 1.4 million in blackjack. All of the casinos now have frequent gambler cards or whatever, and the more you gamble, the more points you get for prizes, etc. But it's also a great way of keeping track. You can subpoena those records from casinos to determine whether or not that's so. If somebody gives you the defense, oh, I won a lot of money at the Horseshoe Casino in Hammond, and okay, drop a subpoena on them. Look up their account and find out if that in fact is true. Okay, so where are some places you can get lots and lots of great data? I talk about one time I was on a late night radio program. It was hosted by two different guys, and this one guy, was talking about all the information you can find out about someone. And this guy was just not just skeptical, but he was getting kind of like oh, you can't do that. He was really going after me. So then they had a break for news, weather, and sports at the top of the hour. And I was, on the air from home. So I turned to my computer, and in those few minutes during the news break, I was able to find out all sorts of things about this guy. And so when we came back, I think I opened up by saying, because I found out I tell him, a lot of people in Chicago were born at blank and blank hospital in I didn't give the day, but knew the year, what hospital he was born in, where he lived when he was growing up, that the L was right behind his house. That made a lot of noise, didn't it? And do you want to talk about your first job? Do you want to talk about the balance in your checking account right now? Now, I did not have that information, but I gave out all this other information that I was able to pull up in 5 minutes. Freaked him out. He was like, okay, you know what you're talking about. And no, don't give my checking account balance. So I said, okay, fine. The availability of data is incredible, okay? Open sources provide evidence of conversion. And even if the stuff isn't free, as a fraud examiner, you can subscribe to different databases that can give you all sorts of wonderful information, okay? Supposedly, like Social Security numbers are protected. If you know where to look, you can still find them on most people. I won't tell you where. They can help develop new leads. Searching for data provides a richer understanding of the target and new investigative leads. Data and information are ethically neutral. Now, you need subpoenas to obtain, and I'll just say, some records from local, county, state, and federal governments. If you're looking for incorporation records for corporations or LLCs and things like that, a lot of that is available. If you're looking for real estate information, somebody bought a home, fine, you can find out all sorts of information on the home. You find out how much they paid for it, things like that. So some of it you need a subpoena, but you know what? If you have an ongoing case, if there's a civil case already filed, the court will give you a subpoena. And again, all sorts of publicly accessible data, both free and that you can subscribe to. And don't forget, city governments, county governments, state government, federal government, commercial sources and database, all sorts of places out there. And you get a better, idea of what this person is all about. Again, state government, Secretary of States, local governments. Do they have to, if they buy a boat, do they have to register and license the boat? Generally, yes. You can find that out. Cars, what kind of car do they have? Again, you might need a subpoena, Secretary of State, for that information, but all sorts of valuable information you can get. And just good old internet searching. Sensitive information is available for anyone to read. Worldwide electronic discussion groups permit the sharing of information between people with similar interests. Email may provide clues to an investigator about a subject's background. Anonymous emailers are being used to send and receive email communications around the world. But again, if they like using social, get on, Twitter or X, I guess they call it now, or Instagram, get on Facebook, other things. Take a look at their profiles. Take a look at LinkedIn and find all sorts of information on people that then can feed into that general knowledge you have for this person and whether or not the profile that they're trying to create is truthful or not. All right. That's the end of this chapter.